So we're gonna, I think, so we're gonna start now. So this session is gonna be about comics in NumPy by Lars Lee. So.
So should I? Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for waiting. Thank you. Thank you. This is my talk, Comics in NumPy, More Likely Than You Think. And so, as you've already seen, in the seats in front of you, there are comics. And in these comics are so many beautiful things, but I really want to say, you get a comic, you get a comic, everyone gets a comic. And everyone gets a comic because I literally promised everyone that I would. So here, we have that. And if you are watching remotely or online, and you do not have a comic in hand, do not worry. There is a digital version as well. Here's the QR code, and a URL if you're a quick-fingered masochist. And if you get a digital version, you could also download a PDF. And with a PDF, you could print it out and make more copies, a very reasonable number of copies on the office printer you certainly have permission to use. And then you could drop off more copies to your coworker, friends, dogs, and loved ones. And I think people in this room already have a head start on reading the comics, but if you haven't finished it yet, don't worry, we'll go through it. So, okay, enough shenanigans, let's get straight to the talk. Psych, actually, here's a really quick introduction of me. I'm Mars, and I'm looking for a job, and prepare for the strangest job interview of your life. So imagine you're reading documentation. You're doing your due diligence, understanding how a library or API works. But it's pretty dry, boring even. Page after page, you're reading and not really understanding. You flip back and forth trying to find that one thing you need. You start thinking to yourself, where did things go wrong? I can't answer the last question, but I can answer the first one about documentation. And the answer is comics. Documentation as comics, yeah! But wait, you may be asking yourself, what, why, how? Very reasonable question. Comics, wait, Actually, that doesn't really make much sense. So I'll give an overview of it in my talk here. So, and this overview will cover some of the comic itself, the origins of it, the inspirations, the brainstorming, how we taking feedback, narrowing it down, peeking into the artist studio, see how it all works, and then finally, kind of like how do we integrate all this stuff together, and then some unusual and interesting final section. We'll come back to that. So the comics tell a story of 3 students, 2 midterms, 1 open source library. And in these comics, you can see how NumPy is useful, how to use NumPy. Oh wait, this is a little painful. Can we improve this? Yes, we can, because NumPy is open source. Wait, what is open source? And how do we contribute to NumPy? And then the bigger story is, NumPy is built by the people who use it, who are scientists and students. And so we have our opening establishing shot of the students at the very distinguished University of Monty. And they just finished a lab, and they needed to look at the cell images with NumPy. But one of them doesn't know how to use NumPy. Thankfully, another does. So they all help each other. The comics move between the story and technical information. Here is a big one on why use NumPy in microbiology. Why arrays instead of images? You can read this more fully on page 2. And then we kind of follow step by step as the students as they use NumPy. However, you know how you start doing something because it looks easy and then becomes increasingly difficult? And you can't step away from it because, no, I got it this time, I swear. That's what this entire page 3 is about feeling that way with NumPy. A student bursts in. Wait, why? Why are we doing this? Why is NumPy like that? This is a huge usability problem. I can't easily see the MTZ, the file name. And now we have this back and forth, this dialogue of, well, you just need to do things in this specific exact way, and everything will work except for that one thing. But otherwise, everything will be fine. And each student has a different approach to this. One is accepting NumPy as it is. One is a bit critical. NumPy can be better. And the last one agrees, NumPy can be better, and we can make it better. So we have a brief introduction to the wide, beautiful world of open source and open science, to strive for the ideals and values, to build the tools that make scientific research more collaborative and transparent. But for all this talk of ideals, what are we actually supposed to do? How do we make it better? What are the steps? And so, what are the steps in contributing? What about issues in GitHub, and what are all these things? Well, don't worry. They're gonna figure it out together. They are gonna muck around and find out. So we then have 5 more pages, a step-by-step, going through numpy.org, looking at GitHub, 5 more pages of the nerve-wracking anxiety of writing your first issue, 5 more pages of explaining the contributor workflow. And yes, I hate to say it, but I'll say it. Read the docs, read the comics. It'll tell you everything you need to know what happens in these next 5 pages. So, that was an overview of the comics. Now let's get into the origins. How did this all start? Well, it started last year at SciPy, and I handed out 300 comics. And these comics were how to write alt text for scientific diagrams and documentation. And in these, I gave a 5-minute lightning talk about it. So thank you, David, for hosting that session. And the comics were inspired by these workshops that I co-hosted with Isabella. And much like I am now, I was pitching and selling the idea of comics as documentation. And a lot of them are the same reasons that I'm talking about today, which is about having a story, humor and emotion, and saying that there's a human heart and reason of what we do and what we're trying to solve. And also, it's collaborative, it's tactile. I convinced my friends to help me fold and staple a bunch of comics, certainly not an hour before the lightning talk. And so when I left that experience, I felt really happy that I pulled this off. And it made me want to pull it off again. And so I started thinking, okay, what else could I make comics for? Well, I've already been contributing to NumPy for 3 years. I've been helping out with the website and writing meeting notes. And I started to develop an idea or a prototype of comic in my head. And this is based off some conversations last year about contribution and maintainer pathways. And these were conversations that were mostly happening in the meeting minutes, and that they're kind of like big picture. And so I made a picture, and I made a GitHub issue to talk about it. And then I gathered feedback from it on the NumPy Newcomers Hour. And then I continued to share it with other artists on open source design forums. So basically, I've been shopping around for a few months with the idea, going door to door like a salesman, people politely nodding and smiling, but not quite biting. And then emerged the Google season of docs. My hero, my nemesis, my everything, you shall see. So this came some months later, and I had the option of submitting a proposal. And the thing is, I have never worked on an academic grant. I've never done the whole shebang. How this felt to me was more of a pitch, kind of like Disney animation, or when you pitch a story, you pitch something for a studio to fund it, to make it happen. And I submitted this with the project mentors, Mukalika and Ross. And I was like, okay, I know how to make comics, but I gotta prove it to people so they can give me money. And so I did the whole project roadmap, where I did timelines, budgets, key personnel, all these things to say, please, please. And I got accepted, whoa, along with some other scientific Python projects. I was so happy, let's go. But, wait, I have ridden myself into a corner because I realized there are some differences in my knowledge of a growing niche field of alt text and an open source library of over 15 years. Another way of saying it that there are one place there's a fewer players, and the other there's a lot. In fact, over 32,000 packages on GitHub depend on NumPy and over 6 million users on the website every month. Suddenly, I was feeling a lot more pressure and I was feeling a lot more eyeballs on what I was doing. And so it's kind of like a catch-22 where I'm building on existing work, but also creating something new. I'm telling a story, but still telling technical information, and it has to be driven by community, but also show my own individual artistic vision. It's innovate, respect, innovate, respect. Can I do both? And I realized, let's just look at existing work that already does both. And great, let's get inspired. Let's see what I was inspired by. And there's a whole list of all sorts of things and all sorts of different thingies, and I'll go through pretty quickly because what really matters is how it all comes together. There is, of course, the existing NumPy documentation. There is the ongoing NumPy documentation meetings that happen every 2 weeks. There is the data taxes framework, which is something the NumPy docs team has been working with to kind of organize the information. And if we say use that framework, perhaps my comments could fit under tutorials, but it's not really clear fit there either. There's already people who are talking about contributor experience, such as Alyssa, Nessa, and Noah, and they have their own whole talk talking about all these very smart things. There is the mangas guide, which is fun and cute. I like that. And there is the Turing way, which is a bit more focused on reproducible scientific research in, again, a community-driven way. So I have all these different things, and I'm telling you, there's a way they all connect together. And I know it doesn't make sense, and there's like 8 different things, but it will. Because what we're doing is taking existing best practices and pushing it over there. And if you know a thing or two about animation, you would know that when Patrick was pushing the thing, there was a frame in between. There was a frame in between where all this inspiration turns into a comic. It turns into an actual product that you're holding in your hand right now. And so the question is now, how? How did this happen? How do we turn this alchemy-like into wisdom? And so this is where I go into, the nitty, the gritty, the underground, the comic-making process. And us Lees, we know a thing or two about making comics. So when it comes to making comics, it's fun, but it's not magical. There's a lot of different steps, as you can see. And so we already went for the first 2, and then we have to figure out the rest with the NumPy community. And so with brainstorming, I was basically asking domain experts on something they don't have domain expertise on, comics. And so I kind of had to act as the domain expert over there and find the middle ground. And the thing is with community meetings, they like HackMD. They like to structure their things down, document it, it makes perfect sense. I didn't want to use HackMD for brainstorming. That felt a little stilted. It's a format that reinforces the primacy of words over images, and I wanted to nudge it in the other direction. I wanted these domain experts to feel like they're writers, that they're storyboard artists, and that we're sharing that same electrifying energy of creativity and unlimited possibilities. And so I landed up on Google Jamboard, which is a digital whiteboard. And with the digital whiteboard, anyone could leave comments, sticky notes, add and draw images, even draw like little things with their mouth. And so I Jamboarded on my prototype, and I ended up hosting 20-minute sessions across 3 different community calls, announcing on the mailing list and everything. And it was really interesting how these 3 different communities responded to the same prototype. With newcomers, there was a bit more focus on non-linear pathways, that there are multiple ways that you can contribute, and it's not just code. At the docs meeting, there was some questioning about the metaphor of contribution pathways and how that metaphor may fall flat. And then in a community meeting, there was it was kind of repeating an ongoing conversation, the difficulty of quantifying the unquantifiable. Like, if you say you do close 5 issues, does that mean you gain new rights on a repository? You can't really promise anything like that, but we're trying to chart something out. And so I then had to consolidate the feedback from 3 different stakeholders, to use business terms, And so how do I bring all these three different threads together? What I certainly did not want to do was design by committee. And I'm sure you've seen very long, disjointed documentation that does the job, but doesn't really have like an overarching narrative or a way to kind of convince you all the way through. And so I decided, okay, you know what I need to do is I've listened to the community, and I'm gonna now listen to myself for a bit. I'm gonna squirrel away and think, okay, what do I take away from all of this? And what really helped in this process was talking to other artists. Because when I was in the NumPy space, I was basically the only artist, and I felt comfortable with sharing my expertise. But it's something really valuable and electrifying and sharing with the artist, someone who gets the same way that you do. And this was Tony Fast, who is a fellow artist, open source advocate, muse, and editor. And so we talked about comic theory, Bauhaus, all sorts of other things that you see here. And in narrowing it down, I realized I should actually just tell one story. I was trying to chart out multiple stories in this diagram because over my 3 years in the NumPy community, I could see all the different experiences, and I want to chart every single one out. But that doesn't really tell one clear, coherent story. I wanted to do it almost anthropologically, and I realized I had to come back to it as a story. And so I decided, wait, I have something that I could use based on a true story. And this is based off Ross, who is a project mentor who works at Berkeley Institute of Data Science. And he talked about a real issue, then turned PR, where his students had difficulties navigating and opening the MPZ files in the NumPy and NumPy for their cell images. And so this issue then became a PR that someone actually, took the time to address. And so I realized, wait, we have narrative potential. And so now we have to turn these two things into a story. And again, how? How? We are peeking into the artist studio where the magic happens. But again, it feels kind of intense. How again are these two things stories? They're screenshots, they're pages, they're lived experiences that I don't have. And so I had to, again, just kind of come back to my tools, my processes, and then continue to find the middle in all that. So in terms of tools, I want to get something out of the way first. Yes, this is all hand-drawn. There is no AI, there is no filters, there is no algorithms, it's not built programmatically. I would like to do some things like that in the future, but this is like farm to table, except the farm is my hand, and the table is your eyes. Don't think about it too much. And so these tools, my hands, a 10-year-old Wacom tablet, Krita, which is an open source graphics software. These are things that pretty simple to access and something that you could actually start doing yourself as well. Writing a script. This is kind of where pedal to the metal, where you just have to figure it out and kind of jump between the big picture and the small picture. And this ended up being a 12-page Google document covering 16 pages of a comic, where the narrative rise and the fall and the character, we add arcs, remove them. And I had to come back to the overarching story. NumPy is made by the people who use it, scientists. But also the emotional core of scratch my itch, or as is described with the MPZ file problem earlier, I also have a problem, dealing with MPZ files. This person brought up an issue, I want to fix it. And so taking that and bringing it, now mixing in the characters. So these characters here, I describe them as having three stooges energy. And these three stooges, they love and hate each other in ways that I think are quite entertaining. We have one that really likes to get into nitty-gritty, that likes to think, that likes to explore. We have one that's kind of more of the straight man, in the middle, maybe, that's all right with me. And then you have one that's falling more of like, why are things like that? Pushing back. And so you can see this happen over these 3 panels here, and how that kind of build off each other, these kind of interactions. And kind of like externalizing some thoughts I'm sure we've all had in our heads, but making them into characters who, again, love and hate each other. Another aspect was building visual metaphors. So, 3 examples. One of them is writing an issue. And for me, I wanted to show writing an issue kind of like putting something up on a community bulletin board that others will see, maybe comment on, and that we could build from there. Another metaphor visually was kind of explaining NumPys and arrays, and the idea of zipping and unzipping and why it's worthwhile to analyze images in that way. And another visual metaphor was taking the idea of open science and making it into a globe that we're all interconnected and helping each other out. So in a page-by-page process, this involves thumbnailing to the script, panel layout and flow, laying out dialogue and speech bubbles, photoshopping, GitHub screenshots, first pass, final pass, editing. The specifics of that, you probably learn more from Scott McCloud, Understanding Comics. It's such an important seminal work. I'm just kind of showing you the highlights on my side. So this is a quick 3-part process where the first one is the script, the second one are my sketches that I made in my sketchbook with pencil, and then the final product. And these sketches are honestly pretty rough because I already have a good idea of what I'm making in my head, and the hard part is actually arranging everything into a panel that is readable, that is understandable. Here's another one. This one is with page 5, and you can see this big chunk missing in the middle. Again, I was more focused on the composition than the details, and so that's why the world there is just 3 circles, keeping the big picture in mind. So I have all that. I have swirled away. I have worked with artists, and I have created something. How do we review it? How do we PR review a comic? There are some things that we can see some parallels. We could see parallels in like writing, scripts, code. We could put like a PR for that. But what about illustrations? That is something that usually takes a bit more time to develop the visual language for, and kind of like a critique back and forth, artist to artist. And so for me, I wanted to integrate the artistic process to existing open source processes and platforms. And so I made a GitHub issue, an oldie but a goldie, and a place to park all the conversations that we've been having over the different community meetings. And so in reviewing, it was a similar process to brainstorming, where I announce it on the mailing list, I present sketches and scripts, and then comments can be given in the NumPy call, the GitHub, or the Google Doc. And so you can see here comments that people left on both of them, along with me transcribing the feedback from the calls and kind of consolidating all these different platforms into one. And another part was I made sure to ask specific parts for feedback. So I have like bullet pointed list about themes, storytelling, accuracy, and kind of like really directing what I'm looking for. And so PR reviewing a comic means explaining my domain knowledge and artistic process, integrating it into existing platforms, and invite the other side in specific and engaging ways. I also made a repository of all the artifacts in the same way one would do the code contribution. And so we have these 4 main things: integration, explanation, processes, domain expert. But after months and months of doing this, I started to feel something familiar and a little uncomfortable. The grant was going great, but my mind was not. I started to kind of tip into the other side, thinking of assimilation, simplification, processes. Okay. And I started to think in these kind of other words. And it started to tip to the other side, and I started asking why. Why am I feeling like this? And so we've come to the final section, we come back to the why. So 4 years ago, almost to this very day, in the same building, and possibly the same room, I was at PyData New York City 2019 as a diversity scholar. And I gave a 5-minute lang talk about comics, much like I am doing now. And some of you might recognize Code Sprite. I know you do, Saul. You were in the audience 4 years ago. And someone else was in that audience too. It was Ralph, the director of Quantsite Labs. And once I finished my talk, I was offered a position there. And in fact, I read a whole blog post about the incredible transformative experience. So diversity scholars in the audience, I know you're out there because I talked to Albina, the organizer for this year. This could also be your chance. And I try to really take full advantage of that job and the opportunity that it gave me. I made comics on Outtext, I hosted workshops, I traveled the country and the world. And now, in full circle, I'm given a platform to talk about what I learned. But do you remember the title of the talk? Comics and NumPy, more likely than you think? The title implies comics shouldn't be a NumPy, or you wouldn't think so. And I spent a whole 20 minutes telling you, yes, comics can. But the title is based off this incredibly old meme. It is a meme that is about removing the unwanted, removing the unexpected. Uh-oh, get rid of that. And so the grant was going great. Like I said, my mind wasn't. And so I kind of asked, kind of ironically enough, going back to the why. Am I worth the investment? Am I worth the risk, the budget? I have to keep doing this because I set the path forward for others like me who are waiting for their own opportunities. I have to prove the world that someone like me is worth keeping. And so somewhere along the way, I turned away from my friends, my partner, my hobbies. I turned away from it all so I could continue to do more work to prove that this is worth it. I had to complete 16 pages, I promised, by the grant deadline. I have to prove the ideals of the grant, of open source, of art. But after talking to my therapist and my friends, I realized that I'm not the only one. There are a few others out there like me, and it is difficult for us. But I don't need to burn myself to prove that there is light in the world. I can't let myself be a martyr. I am not good despite who I am. I'm good enough as is. And so I made the decision. Instead of thinking, I have to do this, I decided to think, well, what do I want to do? What will make me happy and whole? And I decided, yes, I went to an emo party, went crowd surfing for the first time. Yeah. I tabled for a hackerspace at the Coney Island Maker Faire. That's right, we're up in Brooklyn, home of NYC Resistor. I dressed up for Halloween, and yes, that is the Spider-Man. I invented silly games and hacky contraptions to staple comics. Shout out to my man John, I told you he'd be here. I brought a bunch of friends, 7 of them, to a hackerspace called Hive 76 in Philadelphia. And I met this guy even at the Maker Faire. I modeled for a Home Assistant, an open source home automation software, their new logo and merch. Paulus and Madalena, I'm waiting for my influencer t-shirt in the mail. And so all of this to kind of say that just besides just me, there's also how can we do better to support the underrepresented skills, peoples, and backgrounds in scientific Python. And I would say specifically for those who feel like they are this group, it's good to reach out to groups with similar skills and backgrounds, such as open source design, that you should reconnect with your communities and your allies, and to, if you can, step away from the pressure of being the only one. So, spoiler alert, I didn't finish everything I wanted, and that's fine. I talked to the project mentors about it, and I'll continue to make the rest of my pages on my own time. This is open source after all. The grant kickstarted this comics, but it doesn't end it either. And so what's next is I want to continue to make art for communities. I want to share it at other places, maybe Sci-Fi, DevCon, KS Communication Camp. No Starch Press, if you're out there, please get back to me. I do want to step away from art as a full-time job, but I want to inspire others to make art after sharing my process, tools, and experience. I'm proud, I'm happy, I'm ready to walk away and let others take over. And well, I've been doing some deep soul searching recently, and the answer to what's next is a job. I did tell you this would be the strangest job interview of your life. So if you have any of that, you can email me, marsbarlee@gmail.com, hit me on LinkedIn to see my portfolio. And that's it. That's the end of my talk. Thank you everyone for coming. Attendees, I hope you enjoyed your nerd. If you want more comics, you can always look for me in the hallways or green here. And if you're watching online, you can also get your everything else, marsbarlee.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the MCU, the Mars Comic Universe. I'm on Twitter, Mastodon, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Thank you, and good night.